TikTok, it's time to rock. This is a special edition of the 5150 show. I'm here, ladies and gentlemen, based here in New Zealand with my co-host Brad from Melbourne. We're especially excited to be spending the next hour and a half, maybe 2 hours with you, with our special guest, Brad.
Definitely, Andrew. You got me up nice and early for this one, and I'm all revved up and ready to go.
Yeah. We just had a couple of little glitches there, ladies and gentlemen, but we won't go into details about the glitches. But we're always happy and keen to come together, and when we get something working, Brad, it's always a good thing. It's a celebration. But this guest, I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, he's been on our radar, on our orbit, as a journalist, as an expert on rock and roll, reporting for years, Brad.
Yeah, 100%. And Andrew, like as we were talking about it probably yesterday, how excited we are about getting Steve on. So I'm glad we finally got to ironed out all the issues and got here finally. So yeah. I know we're a family show and we try and keep swearing to a minimum or not at all, but it was interesting to hear some of the potty mouth coming from Andrew backstage.
Oh, yeah. Well, showtime, ladies and gentlemen,
TikTok, it's time to rock.
Yeah. Look, we've got a lot of people here in the chat. Guys, we really appreciate you. During the course of the show, I'll highlight your comments. Brad and I won't be doing any personal shout-outs, and that's because we want to get our guest on and talk to him. So don't take that personally if we're not going to do a roll call, but you are important to us. Please subscribe to our channel if you're watching a replay. Go to our communities page, subscribe to our friends there, and when we get Steve in, we'll also have his social media and book buying information attached to this video too, so you guys need to get out there and support him. But I suppose, bro, it's probably a good opportunity for us to get him in and have a bit of a chat. What do you reckon?
I think there's no point leaving him in the green room. Let's get him out.
All right. Cheers, brother.
Please, welcome.
Hey, guys.
I'm still not used to that clapping applause thing, Andrew. Oh, goodness.
Good to see you, Steve. Thank you for jumping on and hanging out with us. Like we were saying in the green room, Brad and I have been reading guitar magazines, guitar books for a long time, Steve. And to have you hang out and, share a stream with us is personally a thrill for myself and for Brad. I know that you're a humble guy, but we have to recognise who you are and the contribution that you've done in the music industry. So thank you, Steve.
Oh, well, thank you, guys. For about 50 years, I was used to being on kind of your side of the microphone, asking questions and listening and doing all that stuff. And I love doing that. But I have to tell you, being on the other side of it and being recognized for what you hoped was a body of work that meant something, because at the time when you're in it and you're doing it, you're just doing it because you love it. And you really don't think about it as, someone's going to react to it 10 years later and hear it, some of this stuff is 30 or 40 years later, or tell you that they read some story and they can, quote your dialogue or they followed you. I mean, you just don't think about that stuff at all. I mean, I certainly didn't. But at the end of the day, you look back and you think, yeah, I did okay. I did some good stuff there, and hopefully some other people were touched by that. And they could kind of feel some of the things I felt when I was sitting there with those giants and all that stuff. So yeah, man, I'm more than pleased and honored to be here for sure.
Awesome, thank you. So what Brad and I are going to do, Steve, is we've got some questions that we want to ask you.
Yep.
And like we were saying in the green room, feel free. This is about you and your project and your book that we're all anticipating. That's what this show's about. I just want to also make a shout out to the guests in the chat too. If you have any questions for Steve, fire them through into the chat, and we'll do the best we can to get those questions through to Steve. And if you're watching a replay and you have some questions for Steve, leave some questions in the comments, and Steve might come back, in a couple of days' time and answer some of those questions for you. But I suppose the first question I want to ask you, Steve, is how did this book journey affect your memories of Eddie?
Good question. It's a hard question. I always considered myself a documentarian. I love collecting things. I love collecting magazines and research and internet. I had books and magazines and I love that kind of thing. And so early on, I was doing these interviews and I was collecting them on cassettes. And so my memories, in getting to your question, my memories for the book came from listening to these interviews for sure. But on the other side of that comment about being a documentarian is the fact that for some reason I did a really bad job of documenting dates and stuff like that. I thought I was really good at it, Okay, I interviewed Gary Brooker on March 3rd, 1975, and I go back, I look at the Gary Brooker cassette, and there's no date on there. So anyway, man, I did that a lot. There are so many of them that didn't have dates on them, and I could just plunge a knife through my neck now, And I write about this in the book. At the time, what seems like an inconsequential piece. Well, okay, man, you did the interview. It's there on tape. You have it in your archive. Does it really matter if it has the date on it? Well, it does, all these years later when, oh my God, I wish I knew what that exact day was. Hell, sorry guys, I wish I knew what year that interview was done. So in answer to your question, it becomes sort of this circular thing.
Sure.
The tapes, as I mentioned, had no dates. So I'm listening and I'm talking to Ed and he's over at the house and there's no date. And, it could be 82, it could be 83, it could be 81, it could be late 79, I don't know. But somewhere along the line, he will say something inevitably that will trigger the chronology. He'll talk about buying a guitar or something, and it's like, well, I now know that Ed bought a Les Paul and I'm just making dates up here. He bought one of his Les Pauls, a Junior or something, in New Orleans when the band was there in 1982. I'm just making up dates here. So now I can place that interview. Oh, this must have been 3 or 4 weeks or 6 weeks prior to him buying that guitar in June of 82. So in answer to your question, a lot of memories were triggered by the tapes. I tried as hard as I possibly could to remember those moments. What became really difficult was Ed would be talking about some subject that we discussed, but it wasn't on tape. it was just a conversation that we had. We were just talking about stuff. And he's referring to that conversation, which could have been a week ago, could have been the day before. And for the life of me, it's like, oh my God, what is he referencing? What is he? So those were the little bits and pieces, man. I hammered my brain trying to remember, what was that he was talking about. And I also talk about this in the book. I mean, I tried as hard as I possibly could to lay out what I believe is a pretty accurate chronology. I may have fudged an interview. An interview might have taken place in 81, and maybe it was 82. So I tried to take my best guesstimate. I don't think it ruined the essence of the book. It was just me taking some liberties to try to really create a timeline. So long answer to a short question. That's kind of what happened.
Awesome.
Steve, I've got a question for you. You're sitting there across from someone like a giant, like Ed Van Halen, and you're asking relevant questions, that you wanted to, record for history's sake. You wanted to, but you were doing it because you loved it. But in the moment, sitting there across from someone like Ed Van Halen, how did you compose yourself? Like for me, I met Ed very briefly for about 10 minutes, and I was young, and I was in shock. I was in like starstruck, so to speak. Obviously, I know it was your job. You're doing it. You loved it. So you presented yourself a certain way. But did you find it was hard to compose yourself and not be a fan? Did you find that difficult to do that?
What, sitting next to Edward Van Halen on your couch in your house in the Hollywood Hills while he's playing your guitar and you're watching him and try to be cool? What could be hard about that? Yeah, I was a total pro, dude.
Yeah.
I've tried to answer that question. Keith, I have to give a shout out to Keith here, who's been a fantastic champion, and I love you, man. And doesn't it become natural after the first or second interview? I don't know if natural is the right word. I met Ed before I'd ever heard him play. And maybe that set the course of the relationship. I don't know. When I met him in 77, some of you may know the history, I'd never heard him play, which was odd because I had been to the Starwood and the Whiskey. I mean, I was there weekly, and how I never saw Van Halen play to this day, I can't figure it out. So when I met him, he was this guy. I mean, I'd heard of Edward Van Halen. Everybody in Hollywood had heard of Van Halen, knew Edward Van Halen. All I knew was that he was a guitar player in this band, a local band, Pasadena, and his band had just gotten signed to a big deal on Warner Brothers Records. That in itself was mind-blowing to me. I always wanted to be a guitar player in a band, nowhere am I trying to compare myself to him, but that's what I always wanted to do. I wanted to be a songwriter. So the fact that his band, this local band, not some English band, not some band from, New York, some, Pasadena band, pretty local band, had gotten a deal on Warner's. It's like it opened the doors, literally and emotionally, for all these other bands. It's like, dude, if these Van Halen guys can do it, we can do it, So when I first met him, I'd never heard him play. And maybe that set the tone a little bit. Had I heard him play, had I seen him play, I couldn't have, the record wasn't out. So had I seen him play, heard him play, would that have changed it? I mean, I don't know. I write about this a lot in the book, where when I was interviewing Ed, I had to go from kind of like being, his friend into being the journalist. And let me tell you, man, there were moments when the friend in me just wanted to fall apart and just sit there and watch him play guitar just like anybody else would. I mean, it was breathtaking for me to watch that. But most of the times, I mean, 95% of the times I was interviewing him. Now, interviews, not just talking or discussion, but interviews. It was for a magazine. It was for an article. So yeah, I had a gig. I was writing, for the Guitar World stuff. I was writing a lot for Japanese magazines. So it was kind of a gig to do, but it was really hard. And what was hard was me talking to him about stuff that I already knew the answers to. We had just talked about, I don't know, what guitars he was using on an album. And it's like, well, Ed, what guitar are you playing on the second track on the, and it's like, and trying to be convincing and not trying to sound like a goofball asking these questions. And the thing about Ed is, Ed told me many, many times he hated doing interviews. And he did. He was uncomfortable. He was uncomfortable talking about himself. He didn't like doing that. But he was an amazingly good interviewee. If I'd sit there, I'm looking at my page of notes and trying to come up with a question, he'd start talking, man. He'd fill that space. And he always made me feel at ease. And I loved him for that because, he could have said just the littlest thing and it would have, it would have pushed me over the edge. But yeah, man, it was hard. It was hard for me to sit there and not geek out. And the times that I did geek out, and it wasn't really geeking out, I never went that far, but it was where I just couldn't stop myself. And again, I write about this in more depth, but he would have just played something on the guitar, or he would have played me some track, and I'd go, Jesus, Ed, that's like one of the most amazing guitar solos I've ever heard. And it's like he'd almost get like angry about it. It's like, yeah, and Ed, Ed go, yeah, it's neat. When Ed said it's neat, for him, that was the top of the scale for him. That was saying, that's the best solo I could have done. That's it. You don't need to say anything more. It's neat. He never said, is that the most amazing solo you've ever heard? I could blow any other guy away, man. Blackmore, he sucks, Slap. He never said that stuff. And the only times, honestly, he'd even take any kind of a shot at another guitar player, it was always in a very analytical way. You talk about a guy's finger vibrato, and there's some discussion in the book, and he talks about that. It's hilarious.
Wow.
But it was always in a musical way when he'd kind of, maybe look askance at another guitar player. It wasn't like, oh man, the guy sucks, I'm so much better. I never heard him say that.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve,
Yeah.
I've got a question for you. Brad and I are going to take some turns here. So most of us watching here on the chat and on the replay, and incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget we will have the links for you to pre-order Steve's book on this channel. So make sure you go there and get your hands on a pre-order ticket. We all know about the process of how we play a guitar, or if we're in a band, Steve, we know about the process of contributing as a musician in a band or songwriting. Tell us about the mechanics of writing. What's a typical day for Steve Rosen when he's writing? Can you give us a little bit of that insight, please?
The way that I would do it.
Yeah, the way that you go about your, writing your book. What's a typical day for you?
Writing the book or writing a song? I'm sorry.
No, writing the book. The mechanics of you as an author. Sorry if I wasn't clear.
Gotcha, man. Yeah, actually, that turned into an interesting thing. Well, let me back up just a little bit. I'd previously written 7 books. There was a book on Jeff Beck that came out only in Japan. It was the first book on Jeff. I wrote a book on Free. I wrote one on Ozzy. book on Randy Rhoads. I think the longest those books ever took me were maybe 3-4 months. Ed's book took me 14 months. One, it was twice as long as any book I'd ever written, and it's twice as long as any other typical music bio. But in answer to your question, the only way that I could write is it had to become a mechanical thing. In other words, it had to become a gig. It had to be something that I did at a certain time.
Yep.
And the way that happened really was kind of, and some of you may have heard the story again, was kind of accidental. I have a cat. His name is Arpeggio. And this freaking cat, man, started waking up in the middle of the night. And he'd wake up at midnight and he'd kind of go back to sleep. Then he'd wake up at 1 or 2 and 3 in the morning. And he'd get up, man, and he'd walk around the bed, and he'd walk across my legs and, sit on the pillow. And it's like, oh my God. So I'd get up and I'd feed him a little bit. Then I'd try to go back to bed. And he'd jump back into bed and he'd meow and he'd make more noise. So one night after him disturbing my sleep, I fed him, and then I don't know why I just sat down at the computer, and this is kind of really prior to kind of officially unofficially starting a book, and I just started jotting down ideas. I wasn't quite sure what they were. They were Van Halen oriented. I don't know, man. Just some memories that I had, just some thoughts, maybe missing the guy. I hadn't seen or spoken to Ed at that point for, this is 2003, it's 2000, I don't know, like 15 or 16 years. So I don't know. And then one night, and I remember again clearly, it was my birthday, August 24th. I sat down and I just started writing in earnest. And I didn't sit down to write a book. I had people ask me about that book, man, when you gonna run that book, we want that book, this and that book. And I kept saying, well, I don't know, man, I don't think so. And honestly, I didn't think I had it in me. I didn't think I was capable of writing it. Honestly, I didn't want to write it. I knew how much unbelievable work it would be. I hadn't spoken to Ed in all those years. It's like, well, what if he sees it or he finds out? And, I just didn't need that trauma in my life. So I started writing that first night, man. And I had a few pages and I looked at it, I go, hey, you know what? This sounds like an intro. And when you get the book, you'll see that little bit. And I kept writing, and at the end of about a week or so, I can remember, I had this intro, a very long intro, longer than most intros should be for a book. But I read it and I go, this is okay. This is all right, I do very little editing. I rarely edit. On this book, I must have gone back and done, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of edits. I wanted every word to be perfect. I wanted every comma. It just had to be perfect. So I rewrote this intro many times. Yeah, man, and that became the routine. Honestly, waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning and writing nonstop for about 4 or 5 hours. It would get light out, go and get a big cup of coffee, which I also talk about in the book. Very crucial to good storytelling. And I kept kind of just blindly doing it, and trying not to look at the page count. And you're working. You got 50 pages and 100 pages, and all right, and you got some chapter titles, and by now I'm listening to the cassettes, and I'm going, oh right, that's when Ed was over, and he was smoking, and I never asked Ed to stop smoking in the house, and why didn't I do that? And why didn't I ask him to smoke outside? I couldn't stand cigarette smoke, And then all of a sudden I got 300 words and 300 pages, and I'm thinking, my God, 350 pages is a good sized book. that's like, I'm almost done. So I get to page 350 and I go, my God, I'm like halfway done. So I thought, screw it, man. I'm just going to write the book I want to write. I'm sorry. Simon is another unbelievable person, and he's been great. Thank you, Simon. I mean, my first instinct was to try to go out and get a book deal, with a publisher. And I knew that no publisher was going to publish a book 600 pages long. I mean, it just, they weren't going to do it. But it's like, hey, I wasn't going to modify or edit myself in that respect. It's like, I'm going to write the book I want. They don't want it, then okay, great. I don't care. I'll sit on the book. I'll put it away. I can say that I did it. So I kept writing, and 603 pages later, I finished it. I had approached some agents. There was one agent for one publisher who kind of liked it, said it wasn't quite right. A couple other guys said, "Nah, man, too long." It's like, okay, great,
Really?
Which is discouraging. Yeah, I could have had an unseen manuscript from John Lennon. I think they would have said, "Oh, it's too long." I don't know, but hey, that was their thing. So my friend Niels Lozauer, y'all know Loz. He's got a fantastic new book of his photos coming out. He did all those amazing shots of Van Halen, the greatest Van Halen shots that I've ever seen. I was talking to him about his book, and I said, "Hey, man, do you know any publishers?" Because I figured he was going to have a publisher for his book. And in typical Loz fashion, if any of you know him or know the way he speaks, Neil is loud and arrogant and in your face, and I love the guy. He goes, "Publisher, are you out of your mind? Nobody uses a publisher. Publish it yourself, man. Are you crazy?" I go, "Publish it myself?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm publishing my book myself. Publish it yourself." I thought he was insane. It's like, oh my God, how much work must that be? Cost notwithstanding, but the process and dealing with printers. And anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up doing that. And yeah, man, the book is exactly what I wanted. And people will love it or hate it. And I'll die on my own sword. But it's a long book, and it's a very honest book. It was written over the course, like I said, of 14 months, 4 or 5 or 6 hours a day, rewrites and going back and going, that sounds horrible. It's
Awesome.
like, I mean, you read it and you go, how could you even think that was good the first time? And it's like, I guess that's why I never went back and edited, because it's like, I don't want to read it a second time. Let an editor read that. So anyway, man, that's how it went. And yeah, it was a really hard book to write, both from a strictly writing standpoint, thinking about Ed, and there were some really sad moments, there were some great moments. At the end of the day, I'm really, if I can pat myself on the back, I'm proud of myself for writing it. Not that it's a good book, not that it's a great book, not that it's a horrible book, but the fact that I started it and finished it, and I can say that I did that, and
Awesome.
I'm proud of that. So
before Brad fires you a question, I just want to do a little shout out. We've got a co-host here watching. You've done a shout out to him, Simon Hosford. So we're going to take you up on the offer that you gave us back in January. Sorry, yeah, I think January, when you released information on the book. As soon as we get our copies of the book and we read it, you said that you'd love to come on and do a post-reading show with us, and we'll make sure Simon Hosford is on that show, because I'm sure he's got a lot of questions to ask you when he finishes reading that book. So we're going to take you up on that, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote that message in January.
Yeah, January.
God, are you sure it wasn't last month? Come on, guys. It's funny. every time I put out an announcement, hey guys, the book's going to be here in 2 months, I really believed and thought that the book was going to be here in 2 months. So, 2 months go by, and, these aren't excuses. These are the realities. Man, the COVID thing got bad. I didn't get it. But, workers got it, There was an extreme paper shortage in this country. I mean, to the point where printers didn't have paper. All the shipping stuff, man, the ships, lined up out in the Pacific Ocean outside our ports here for months and months. Yep. I actually went through 2 publishers. So my intentions really, I thought, oh yeah, the book's done, and and I'm kind of getting the word out in January. Yeah, the book will be out in March or April. I truly believe that, and 99% of everybody who pre-ordered have been incredibly cool. Hey man, when's the book coming out? I can't wait to read it. And hey, I get it. I know that some of you've been waiting. I believe that you're really going to love the book, and I believe that the wait, not that it was intentional, will be worth it, and that when you get done, you're going to say, "Oh my gosh, that was really good, man." Yeah, So that's my greatest hope. Yeah. So yeah, So in answer to everybody who's been waiting, sorry guys, the best intentions of mice and men, right? But it's coming. I'll tell you, it's not too far away. So just hang in there, guys.
Steve, I love the story you spoke about with how your cat woke you up, and you started just writing about Ed, and you weren't necessarily thinking about writing a book. But once it became a direction and you knew you were going to be writing a book, did you have to go into archives to find the tapes of interviews and all sorts of things like that? And did you find it hard? You misplace things and then you come across things later and then have to readjust what you're writing? Is that what happened along the way?
You have no idea.
Mm.
I said from the start of this conversation, oh, I'm a documentarian. Well, it turns out I was a really bad one, man. Thank goodness. I mean, the tapes were labeled early on. I never even used to label the tapes. So I'm listening. I'm going, well, is that Stevie Winwood or is that Mick Ronson? It's like, and then I got to listen to it and hear a reference to Traffic or David Bowie, or, So, yeah. So I had, I don't know, man, there could have been 30 or 40 Van Halen related tapes. A lot of these, and I referenced these in the book, and you may have heard me talk about them, the Twilight tapes. These were basically Ed and I just talking. These weren't interviews. So a lot of that stuff is just, most of that stuff was dated, but there's nothing on there to tell me what's on there. So yeah, I'd be listening and I'm thinking, okay, I'm in chapter 43 and I'm in the 3rd record or whatever, and I'm thinking, oh, so this tape must be from, Women and Children 3, Women and Children First period, and I'm listening. And again, Ed will make a reference. I'm going, oh my God, he's talking about what happened right after the 2nd record. I have none of that. So I now have to insert this stuff and push all the chapters back. I also went back and pulled out every printed article I could find of mine, all the Guitar World articles. A lot of that stuff I still have on, a lot of that stuff has never been published anywhere. So I had, that stuff was just, Word docs. So I pulled out that. I had some diaries, I had a few notes I'd made, but it was extraordinarily difficult. My first idea about the book was to sort of be like this ping pong ball that just bounced back and forth. So, maybe chapter 1 would be from 1984. And then, chapter 2 would have been from the first record. It just got so complex. It's like I couldn't follow it myself. There's no way I could expect a reader to follow it. So it got, man, it was really tough. And I'll give you one other little hint here. Because I wanted the book to be as incisive and, personal as it could possibly be, I took on the persona of like this omniscient voice. So you're reading the interview, for instance, the one I had up on YouTube, if any of you have heard that one. So you're reading that because I include that, but I include all of it. What's up on YouTube is just a little excerpted bit. So you're hearing, Edward play some of the songs, and then we're talking. And so, but then I pull you aside and I go, well, yeah, Ed was talking about that, man, but he was really talking about this other thing. And Ed was not in a good mood that day. And Ed was, and I wanted you to be right there next to me. Not only, listening to the interview, but watching and seeing what I was seeing and hearing Ed's tone of voice. And that became a thing I tried to do. I mean, I'd heard him speak so many times, I could tell instantly if he was in a really good mood, if he was in kind of a neutral mood, if he was in a bad mood, if he was done talking, if he wanted to talk some more, so I try to, fill you in on that. And that became a difficult thing. That was a hard thing to do. I don't think I've ever heard of another writer do that, which is another reason why the book is 603 pages long, because a lot of these little bits, took up some pages, I used up some words on them. So yeah, all of that went into it, the going through the archives, listening, trying to remember back, putting the pieces in order, then commenting on the pieces, and then transcribing accurately. Because you have to remember, man, when I started doing these interviews, I was using a piece of garbage. I mean, it was literally like a $5 Radio Shack tape recorder with this little microphone that didn't even come to it. Thank goodness it worked, And it was this tape recorder was so bad, like the flap would come up, you'd insert the tape and then you'd, push the little plastic part down and it would engage, and, you'd hit record. Well, the top, the hinges had broken. So if I just hit eject, the whole freaking top flies off. Yeah. So I've got to keep my hand on the top. My hand is numb. Exactly. My hand is numb. I remember doing a Jimmy Page interview. My hand was so numb. I thought, oh, please, Jimmy, please stop talking. I didn't really wish that. And I didn't say anything. But my hand is like, I'm pushing down on this thing. And if you push down too hard, you're going to maybe mess up the cap stands or the speed's going to start going slow. So plus I'm using, like 3 tapes for $1 because I'm thinking, well, what does it matter if I use the same tape? I'll record on the back or I'll record 3 interviews on the same tape, just put a little space. I mean, again, you don't think that 30 or 40 years later, the audio is going to be ostensibly more important than the text. I don't think anybody thought that way, but at least I had it together enough to keep my tapes, to ultimately get them digitized. So I have everything on CD, everything on cassette. This very good friend of mine, Dave Jeffress, did all that for me. Took many years, man, dumping all that stuff. I mean, I know writers who all they did was take notes. They didn't record anything. And other writers just recorded over them, which I did the first 2 or 3 times. First interview I ever did was with Joe Cocker. I recorded over it. I could kill myself anyway. So hearing Ed, it's like, well, did he say Fender or Blender? Did he say, you know what I mean? So I'm listening back and forth. It was a thing, man. I earned my keep on that one. So
Awesome. Hey, I'm glad you
yeah,
mentioned Jimmy Page, because the 77 interview you did with Jimmy Page, and on our channel we host another show called the Zoso Show, Steve, and we'd love to get you on maybe one of those shows.
Yeah.
But that 77 interview you did with Page is recognised as a groundbreaking interview. In fact, Led Zeppelin heads still to this day refer people back to that article, not necessarily because of the questions Jimmy Page gave us, but more importantly, the questions you asked back in 1977. So Brad and I and everybody, once we find out that you're writing this book, we're getting together, we're talking, we're saying if it's anything like Steve was asking in that article, this book is going to be everything that guitar players, and obviously it's reflected in the title of the book, TONECHASER, is ever going to think about asking. So my question is, given the close relationship that you had with Eddie, and your history in asking really, really good questions, Steve, how do you feel that this book that you're going to present us is going to be recognized as perhaps the defining biography on EVH? Have you thought about that?
look, I would be a liar if I said I didn't want my book to be something special that stood out from the others. and those were other books that have come out recently. Those were excellent books. You know, Brad and Chris's book. I mean, those guys are fantastic writers. You
Sure.
know, and Brad has always been a champion of mine. You know, he mentions me in his book, which was an extraordinarily nice thing to do, and he excerpted some of my material. You know, when Brad was editor of Guitar World, man, he was really good to me. Paul Brannigan's book, I mean, I think the guy is an astonishingly good writer. He is a really, really good writer. Look, man, yeah, there you go. I hope people see my book that way. You know, every once in a while, you know, I have some advanced copies. You know, I'll pull the book off the shelf, and I never do this. I honestly never read anything that I've written. I've never read any of the books that I've written. You know, after they were done, I never read articles. I never look back. I can't do it. I just can't do it, you know. So when you guys say, "Oh my God, we love your '77 Zepp interview," it's like, "Oh my God," you know, they really got it. You know, I mean, they got everything. Yeah, exactly. They got what I was hoping they were going to get, and the fact that you got it and you're giving it back to me, that's the gratifying part. You know, me to look back at it, I might go, yeah, it's good, or oh, why didn't I ask him that? Look, I think and know that my book is the antithesis of every other book that's out there. It's not a book about the history. Those guys cover that stuff infinitely better than I could. It's not necessarily a technical book. I mean, yeah, Ed talks about guitars and he talks about his gear, but that's not it. You know, I mean, I've done those kinds of interviews with Ed, and so a lot of other people, and they've done it better than I could. I'm not honestly a technical guy. I mean, I can't tell you that Ed used a Lynn Ellsworth body. I mean, I don't know that history like some of you knuckleheads out here do. But I was given this gift, man, of being allowed to sit there while this guy played guitar that we all looked on as, you know, probably the greatest guitar player in the world at that time.
Yep.
And so I tried as hard as I possibly could to interpret what that felt like, what it sounded like, what Ed looked like. How did he hold his hands on the neck? What was his picking hand doing? You know, you can't think that what you do is going to be this groundbreaking thing, because you know, everybody could read that book and go, yeah, it's okay, you know, and I don't think that's going to happen, but you never know. I hope that at the end of the day, people look back on this book the same way that you tell me people look back on that Page interview. Let me digress for 1 minute to get back to that Page interview. I told you before, when I was doing interviews with all these people, you know, Pete Townsend and John McLaughlin and, you know, Jeff Beck, and they were stories for magazines. And yes, I was trying to put together the best interview I could. But I never thought about, you know, what I was doing as being important, or at this moment in time, I need to capture something. When I was out with Zeppelin in '77, and I was there sitting with Jimmy Page, I knew that this interview was going to be maybe one of the most important interviews he ever did, only because he had never really done in-depth guitar interviews up to that time. And it's like, well, you know, there was Guitar Player, Guitar World magazine wasn't even around. It's like, how many other guys are going to sit here and talk to him about the guitars he was playing, you know, on the King sessions or whatever? So I knew how important that was. If you know about that interview, you know that Jimmy turned out to be pretty strange. By Page's standards, he was actually pretty cool for the 2 days I interviewed him, but it was still very strange. That interview was about half of what I wanted it to be. I'm telling you, man, I had like 30 pages of typewritten questions. I had questions about every song, every riff, every album. To me, you know, it was all about the first, second, and fourth records, because those are the records I love. But, you know, by then we were on the Presence album. And, you know, I just had so much more stuff I wanted to talk about. And we couldn't get to it because, as you all know, I had a run-in with John Paul Jones, and they were going to beat the crap out of me and toss me off an airplane. But, you know, the fact that people got that sense of that interview and the import of it, that's fantastic. That's what I hope people feel like after reading TONECHASER. Yeah.
Wow. I really, really hope you can come and join us on our Zoso show one day and talk about Zeppelin. That will be amazing. But we'll get back to Ed. We'll keep it on topic.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a strange one. Did the Van Halen estate, did they help you at all? Did they hinder you at all? Was there anything from those guys, or did they just leave you? And has there been anything since you've, you know, announced you're releasing the book, come forward from those guys? You don't have to answer that, but I'm sure
it's yeah, man, it's a worthwhile question. No. Short answer, I have not heard from anyone. One of my first thoughts was how fantastic it would be if I could have had one of those guys write a little forward. You know, Alex, Wolf, who I've never met, Valerie, who I'd met several times, and I write about that in the book, and she loved the idea of me doing the book.
Wow.
And I talk about that. I don't want to give it away because it's a really
good,
beautiful little part in the book. But she really had my back. She understood what a book about her husband meant. She understood. So Valerie writing something, Michael, the book I wrote was really honest. I thought, if I'm going to sit there and talk about this remarkable guitar player and how he changed everything we ever knew about guitar, then I have to write about the other side of it. If only to be honest to myself, because if I didn't, it's like you're reading it and I'm going, well, they're really not getting this other side of it. And to me, it just seemed like a hollow thing, and I couldn't do it. So
Sure.
the book is incredibly positive. I mean, I think you're going to come away and feel really good. But there's some darker moments in there, and there's some moments when Ed is talking and relating about Michael. Oh, and Dave. I thought, hey, I'll get Dave to write a foreword. He says some things about Michael. He says some things about Dave, but it's all in context. And I think when you walk away, you'll understand why Ed had those feelings.
Uh-huh.
So the idea of me approaching Dave, Dave reads a book and goes, Ed saying those things about me, and you want me to write your foreword? Though Dave might have enjoyed it. Maybe Dave might have gotten off on that,
Yeah.
And same thing with Michael. Al, towards the end, and I was always friends with Al, just as a byproduct of being friends with his brother.
Sure.
I saw Al several times. He'd be up at 5150, or maybe I saw him backstage or at a rehearsal. And we were friendly. I think he didn't mind me hanging around.
Awesome.
But towards the end there, Al and I had some things. Again, I don't want to give it away. So having Al do it, that wasn't going to work. Like I said, Valerie and I got along great. I think we had a really amicable relationship. I think she enjoyed my company. I certainly enjoyed hers. But there's some moments in there about her. She would read that and she'd, so I couldn't approach her. But I guess what I hoped would happen in some fantasy world was that Wolf would have seen, whatever postings I put up, or seen this thing and read, oh, this guy, Steve Rosen, knew my dad for 26 years, I wonder what he's like. I wonder what my dad said to him.
Sure.
Wolf obviously misses his dad. I think, I think that he missed out on a lot who his dad was, and I thought he would think, well, he knew my dad, way back in the day, and before I was born, right? I wonder what his memories of my dad are, So I keep thinking, the phone's going to ring, or I'm going to say, hey, man, this is Wolf, and I want to read what you read, or something. Those are my fantasies. Hey, Wolf might read the book and go, that's lies. That's none of that's true. My dad didn't do any of those things. That's not who my dad was. I can't control that. But yeah, man, in answer to your question, I thought that would have happened. Somebody had mentioned this to me, and I thought, well, that really would have been a fantasy world. But they had asked me, did anybody ever reach out to you about Ed's funeral or his passing? Did anybody say anything to you? I go, no, man, they didn't say anything. Again, it would have been those same people, primarily, it would have been Val and Wolf and Alex. Janie, his second wife, I never met, so I didn't know her. But yeah, man, that would have been a remarkable gesture. I never honestly thought about it at the time. I certainly never anticipated it. Yeah, that would have been pretty special. I mean,
yeah, I think what people have to realise, Stephen, and I'm sure they do, and I'm going to mention this, there are a lot of different ways that you can approach a biography or a history of an artist, And I think what's going to be valid about your book, and Keith mentioned it earlier too, with Brad and Chris's book and Paul's book, they knew Eddie. So that first-hand account from a historical perspective is always going to be appreciated, as opposed to, say, Mark Lewisham's approach to writing the Beatles, where he's going to go back and look at every document, every detailed thing that the Beatles did individually and give us that kind of biography. So, those biographies on Eddie are going to come when, in the future, when you get these trained historical academics to write those kind of books. But the real story for us clearly is going to be in your book and some of these other books that we mentioned, because you knew Eddie, and the fact that you're going to give us an account that is going to balance things, I think, is in the spirit of who Eddie is or was as a man and as a guitar player. So well done for that. Sorry for that little opinion, but I do have one question. So a couple of questions actually that are together. So we dig you because you're a guitar player, and that gives you insight into the questions that you ask, and we've discussed that already with the Page article. So can you remember the first piece of music that you and Eddie ever jammed to together as guitar players? And did Eddie ever seek your advice or input on anything, whether it was something personal or anything musical he was working on?
When you say personal, you mean non-musical, something in his personal life?
Yeah.
In terms of me jamming with Ed, I mean, those were hard moments. I mean, it's like me, and I think I talk about this book. John Steinbeck was my favorite author. He's the greatest writer who's ever lived, So it's like, John Steinbeck's coming over to the house, and I'm working on a book, and I leave the pages out so he can read them, Or it's like, hey man, let's write a paragraph together. You know what I mean? So I mean, the first thing with Ed, which is why I love the guy so much. It was never like, oh hey man, I'm gonna let you jam with me, because had he done that, it would have frozen me. I mean, maybe if you were, I don't know, George Lynch or or Steve Vai, you could sit there and do that thing. I mean, as someone who can't tune a guitar, so Ed never would stigmatize it. I mean, well, remember, and again, I write about these moments in the book, and they're so great.
Cool.
They're just so cool. I love these moments. I remember I had this one little riff that I'd been working on, and I was terrified to start playing, because I thought, oh my God, what if he says, oh, man, no, that's, and he wouldn't say it in a mean way. He just, it just wouldn't work for him. And I get that, fair enough. But it's not like you're jamming with your buddy from, down the block. And says, no, dude, let's try this. You know what I mean? It'd be like, it's Edward Van Halen saying, no, let's do something else. So I remember playing this, and he goes, hey, yeah, man, that's good. Keep playing it. So anyway, I keep playing, and now he's playing bass, and I'm playing one of his guitars, and I write about this. And again, I don't want to give it away. Not that I'm going to give it away.
Wow. Okay.
You know, man, so that was just a set of chords. And, you know, watching him play bass, and again, I write about this stuff, was, I mean, look, we know how unbelievably good and talented he was. We know when we hear Ed playing a Van Halen song, how amazing it is. And, you know, switching from that rhythm to the lead stuff, you know, doing that Hendrix kind of thing, and his attack, and how amazing he is. But when you hear him, like just on these little chords that I came up with, that I know that I've messed around with for 1,000 hours, and what he does on the bass, man, you can see inside him and how he thinks harmonically and what goes through his mind when he's working on his songs. And you think, oh my God, this guy is so much more than just this astonishing guitar player. He is a real legitimate composer and orchestrator and arranger, you know, and that's the stuff that I got. And then later, I think we jammed on Superstition, Jeff Beck style, you know, because Ed was a big Jeff Beck guy. And another time, and again, I write about these things in the book, and I'm kind of giving a little bit away, but Ed is jamming on a song that I had recorded, a piece of garbage 4-track Fostex recording, and he comes over one night unannounced, and he takes my guitar and he plays. And in fact, there's a little, I put up it's like a minute video. It shows like a guy kind of driving, and Ed is kind of superimposed from the book, and you hear this little guitar over this other track, and I realize the quality isn't great. Well, that's Ed playing over one of my songs and genuinely going, oh my God, this is like really good. You know, it's like, you know, and me trying to process. And that's when I become the omniscient author. And I pull back and I say, okay, people, now just imagine you're there and Ed Van Halen's in your house playing your guitar, playing a solo over one of your songs. What would you do? You know? And so I've tried to convey all that. But in answer to your question, man, yeah, it was just sometimes just chords. It wasn't like any specific song other than Superstition. It was just trying to come up with some stuff that was interesting. Yeah, those were amazing moments. Thank God I had enough brain power to have a cassette going, you know, because I hear that stuff now and it's like, wow, that's cool stuff. Yeah.
I got a bit of goosebumps then when you're talking about that, Steve, and I can only imagine what that would have been like, that experience, and even, you know, thinking back now since Ed's passed, at those moments, you must have shared some amazing times with Ed, and we're really looking forward to, you know, reading your book and sharing some of those experiences, because it sounds like you're going to be putting us in that moment. So we can't wait to get our hands on the book to read it. So, you know, well done for documenting all that the way you're going to portray that in the book. But I've got a question for you. You know, did you ever offer any advice to Eddie and know that he took it up, that it would be like, yeah?
I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. I forgot part B. Well, if you guys would stop talking and interrupting me, God.
Sorry.
The only times, no. Did Ed play me, you know, the riff from Beautiful Girls and say, hey, man, what do you think of that change? No, he never said that.
Okay.
He would play it. And again, you know, it's me trying to walk that tightrope between mad, crazy fan and journalist. So, you know, he'd play me that stuff. And, you know, my instinct, my impulse is to go, oh my God, that Ed, that's just most unbelievable, you know. But sometimes I go, hey, no, don't go there. That annoys him, you know. He's not going to react anyway. So, you know, just go to the other side. and not that I was trying to do that consciously, but I was just trying not to go overboard. So he played something, or he played some solo. He played some piece of music, and I go, yeah, that's really good. And he'd go, well, he goes, well, I think it's neat, as if my opinion really carried some weight with him. Like, you mean you don't think that's the greatest, amazing solo you've ever heard in your life? For him to go, well, I think it's neat. Like, he's trying to defend his position. To me, that said so much about the guy. I mean, it said everything you needed to know about how the guy saw himself. And I saw that over and over and over. I'm sorry, I need to digress. Keith talking about the amount of orders. It's been pretty fantastic, man. And actually now I'm actually trying to address padded envelopes, and it's getting insane. Trying to keep addresses straight, and I got to assign it to this guy and that guy. So I think I'm just going to keep all the money and go to Mexico. So no, I'm kidding. It's been great. So, but no, I mean, he would never specifically ask, hey man, do you think that change, is a cool change? He never asked that, but it was always more of a, what do you think of that thing? Yeah. And then the other times it was, we were talking about the Fair Warning record, which, I know that's a lot of people's favorite record. His playing, oh God, I mean, his solos, I was soloing one of them, push comes to shove, I don't know, one of them, I go, Ed, my God, it was just unbelievable, and he goes, well, thank you. I mean, I pissed him off. He didn't, it's like he didn't need to hear it. Ed, and I also write about this in much greater depth, but Ed always knew how good he was. And he didn't need to hear it, but he was always, I've been around enough other guitar giants, these guys, and none of them had that thing that Ed had. And if they did, they hit it really well. You never saw that vulnerable part in Jimmy Page. Never.
Wow.
You never saw it in Billy Gibbons. Steve Vai has a little bit. I know Steve a little bit. He talked about some of his younger days being an insecure cat, but you don't see it in Joe Perry. You don't see it in Slash. At least I didn't. But Ed had this thing about him. That was amazing. The second part of your question: did he ever ask for advice in his personal life? He did. It wasn't so much advice as it was just this conversation that evolved, and it got into some pretty deep and dark places. Those were part of what I call the Twilight tapes. Some of that stuff came out on regular interview tapes, like maybe after an interview was over. Stuff that I never would have printed in an original interview, but more times than not in these Twilight tapes. Yeah, and yeah, I think we got into some really heavy stuff, some extraordinarily heavy stuff. To be honest, I think people will read that stuff and I think they'll. I was amazed by it.
So Steve, I have to jump in and interrupt. So you've written about this in your book, these things.
All of this is in the book in much greater detail.
Wow.
See, this is the stuff I was talking about. I could have easily have left this stuff out because it gets so personal for me as well. I mean, I talk about stuff, and it's like, if Ed, if Ed's gonna be vulnerable, then I have to be as well. So, I, it's just the only kind of book. It's had to be out there. I mean, it would have been so easy to have left those moments out. But
Wow.
I think people are going to read that stuff and go, "Oh my God, that's amazing! I didn't think Ed was like that." Look, I don't want to make it sound like Ed was Ed stole cars or was a bank robber. I mean, not stuff like that, but personal things, that got pretty heavy. So
Well, the fans want to hear that. I do. I'm a fan. I want to hear that, Steve. I want to hear about your experience. We don't want to hear the Hollywood version of your experience with Eddie. There's plenty of other articles out there and hacks writing about these Hollywood experiences. You know what I mean? We want the meat and potatoes, and I think the fans deserve that. The fans of Eddie Van Halen and Van Halen have been around for a long, long time, Steve. And the fans deserve to get this book. They deserve to get the story. And thank you for having the courage to do that, because I'm not sure, and I can't back it up. Other writers would have done that.
I don't want to come off sounding. Oh, I'm sorry. I gotta give a shout out to my good buddy Adam here. Adam is the one who put the little thing together. I love this guy. I don't want to sound like a martyr here, that I'm going to do this and they're going to come after for that. That wasn't it at all. It would have been easy to have left that stuff out. You bring up the fan, and I don't know how other writers. I don't know how other writers write. I don't know if they're writing a book and thinking about their audience. I mean, to some extent they are. If you're writing about guitar players, you're not writing, a book, for a fourth grader or, someplace, where they maybe have never heard of Van Halen, if that's possible. So to that extent, yes, you're aware of your audience. But I was really consciously aware of that. Going back to the guitar world, stories, people would write to me when I was supposed to be writing that book. And some of these, letters that these people sent about how much it meant to them and how much Ed meant. I mean, I'd never read stuff like that from fans. I mean, I knew hardcore fans, but it's like, I thought, and again, I don't know if it's not like I thought about it every time I sat down to write, but in the back of my mind, it was something like, Van Halen fans live and die by the guy. I mean, I've done some of these interviews, and there have been pictures of me holding a guitar body, and guys go insane over the body because they know this about to me, that's extraordinary. To be that passionate about a guitar body, that's unbelievable to me. So yes, I mean, I did think about the fan when I was writing this book. I mean, they popped up a lot, and when I was writing something and I would scale back, I'm thinking, oh man, yeah, I don't know if you should write that stuff, man. That's, but I thought, no. And not necessarily, not off the fan, because I thought that's the only kind of book that I could write. But yes, man, the fan is part of this book. And that can sound corny, or you can not believe that, but I've always been that kind of writer. I've always been blown away that fans read what I write. It's always hard for me to make the connection that I sit and type this story and it goes out and somebody's sitting in their room and holding their guitar and reading this story about Jimmy Page or Wishbone Ash. That to me is just the most beautiful thing. I mean, that experience is just amazing to me. So, yeah, man. the fans were always there when I was writing.
Well, thank you, Steve, because everyone that's watching this and everyone that buys your book will truly appreciate it without a doubt.
I hope so, man. I really do. I think it's a really good book. It's the best book. It's the best book I could have written at the time. I mean, I didn't have any better book in me, you know. I'm sorry, Holly Lewis is another hardcore fan. She's terrific.
Absolutely.
You know, and over the years, I mean, I'd like to think that, you know, maybe I'm a better writer than I was back in 85 or 86 or 87 when I may have done that first book, you know. I don't know. I mean, certainly a lot of writing has gone on in between then. But yeah, man, I'm really proud of the book. And I don't tend to say that very much, to be honest with you.
Well, we're gonna wrap the stream up shortly, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys have any, we've got CJ Cheevlers in the chat who is the author of the Van Halen Encyclopedia. We've done a show with him, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to go and check that out, but are you still playing the guitar, Steve?
Oh, I'm glad you bring that up. Just one quick last plug. I actually recently finished a project called Highway Sentinels. My friend Jimmy Waldo, Jimmy was the keyboard player in Alcatraz. He sort of brought Yngwie into the band and then got Steve Vai. Jimmy's currently on the road in Europe with a version of Alcatraz, playing Quiet Riot for a short while. I've been writing songs with Jimmy going back to the 80s.
Wow.
To long story short, he and I had this batch of songs that we had done that were, I mean, they were really good songs. Kind of 80s, I don't know, heavy-ish Foreigner meets, I don't know, Tom Petty-ish, I mean, really, really good songs that we had written together. So he had a manager who heard them and said, listen, if we kind of tweak them, maybe, modernize them, bring them up to date a little bit, I could probably get you a deal. I thought, oh my God, that would be unbelievable. So Jimmy actually lived out here by me. He moved back to Chicago a while ago. He was out here for about 3 weeks actually working with Alcatraz. And he stayed on my pad in Laurel Canyon, and we worked on these songs. And so a lot of these songs originally had some really great guitar players on there, some buddies of mine, guys that I had interviewed. Keith Holland. Keith has been the guitar player in Chicago for many, many years. Harry Cody was in a band called Shotgun Messiah, an amazing guitar player. Oh, God. The guitar player from Dio. God, I'm sorry, guys. I'm spacing. Anyway, a lot of great guitar players on these original tracks that I brought in. Excuse me? No, not quite as well known. Earlier.
Okay.
Just did one record. Anyway, so I put on some more guitars. I got my sound together, and I kind of, put some guitars on, and then send it back to Jimmy, and he did his keyboards thing. And Giles, the manager, suggested, hey, man, do you think you could reach out to some of your friends to maybe do some solos? And I thought, yeah, okay. Because, these guys that I had originally playing were kind of, I'd interviewed them many times. Not like we were great buddies. But it was more of a low-key thing, come in, play on a demo, I'll toss you out $75. Giles wanted me to kind of go after some bigger guys. And I thought, oh, man, there's a fine line, interviewing somebody and then asking them to play on a record. But I thought, hey, you know what? I'm really proud of these songs. I'm going to do it. And the singer was sang an Accept. Oh, God. I'm sorry, guys. My freaking brain. Really good singer. Oh, God. Anyway. so I thought, okay, I'm going to reach out to guy. So I thought, all right, I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to reach out to Joe Satriani. I've interviewed Joe like 20 times. The guy is always the sweetest guy. He's unassuming. Joe has that thing I'm talking about, man, that vulnerability, that heart thing going on. I thought, hey, the guy will say one of three things. I don't like the track, which is fair enough. This is like nothing he played on. 2, I'm too busy. Or 3, yeah, give me $3,000. You know what I mean? But I thought, hey, okay, those are all legit reasons. So I sent it to him, and half hour later, he goes, yeah, man, when do you need it? I go, well, man, 2 weeks. He goes, okay, you'll have it in 2 weeks. 2 weeks on the day the track comes back, he has burned down this solo. Again, it's that thing I was talking about, Ed playing on one of my songs. We know how remarkable Joe Satriani is, but hearing Joe Satriani kind of like on a song not in his oeuvre, one of my songs of just kind of a, an 80s rock tune, and what he brought to it was just amazing. Anyway, so I got Joe to play in a song. I got Bumblefoot to play in a song. I got Matt Heafy from Trivium to play in a song. Paul Gilbert, Mr. Big to play in a song. Tracy Guns, Joe Stump, the guitar player from Riot, and forgive me again, man, I forget his name. Anyway, yeah, man, so I brought out the guitar for that, did these rhythm tracks, and that was fun. That was fun. So what I'm hoping is, yeah, man, some band's going to want the Highway Sentinels to open for them, and I'll be out there on the road, standing in the corner with my guitar unplugged. I just want to stand on stage, dude. I don't care if I play. So I'll stand with my guitar unplugged, and some big guitar player will stand up front playing my parts, So yeah, that was fun. I love doing that, man. Like I said, songwriting thing is what I always wanted to do, but that's a hard one, man. It's hard to make a living at it. So guys who do that and have careers, my hats are off to those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I agree, and it's been wonderful you sharing that last bit of your musical journey with us and everybody in the chat, and obviously anyone that watches the replay later on. Steve, it's been a pleasure and an honor for our channel to have you share some time with us and share some insights without giving it all away. With Brad and I and everybody here in the chat, we can't wait for the book, and the fact that you've elaborated a few things for us and for everybody else that people may not be aware of, I'm sure is going to make the book even more appealing for Van Halen fans. So, like I've said, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching a replay and you haven't put your pre-orders in for the book, we'll attach that here. For you to do that, you need to get that into Steve now, because he's busy addressing all the envelopes for that book. So you want to be able to get into that first run. And we do look forward, though, Steve. We're going to take you up on the offer. When the hosts of the 5150 show have gone through your book. We'd love to get you back on and just talk about some of the things that you've presented to us, and I'm sure you're itching to talk to people about some of these things, which is going to take the conversation with Van Halen to again another level, isn't it? It's going to, people's awareness. The average fan is going to be aware of these other things. So it's like a lifting of our collective consciousness on all things Van Halen. I can't wait for it. It's wow. It's going to be an event.
Well, thank you for all of that. I will try and live up to everything you've said about me and the book. Yeah, man, when the book comes out and everybody has read it, those conversations, I think, will be amazing.
Wow.
I think you'll learn a lot of stuff you didn't know about them. And my greatest hope is you walk away, when you finish the last page and you say, yeah, I know Eddie a little better now. I understand him a little better now. So, yeah, that's my great hope. And just finally, and I know I keep saying it, and I should probably keep my freaking mouth shut, but the book is not far away. So, it's certainly not 8 months away or 6 months away. And
Steve, take your time. Take your time. We're all aware, and everybody here in the chat will do our best to get that out to other people. That you take your time with this. This is a part of who you are as a writer too. So we get it. We get it, bro. Take your time.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And Steve, we will share all the links that you want us to share on the video that goes up on YouTube. So make sure we get all the right links and the order form that you want us to fill out to order it directly from you.
Okay. Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
Well,
I'll let you.
Well, I'm just going to say one quick thing. I'm going to ask Brad to say one quick thing, and then we're going to give you the last word, Steve, and we're going to wish everyone well. Thank you guys in the chat for hanging out with us. Like I said, I'm going to parrot myself. It's been a privilege and an honor for me personally to be talking to Steve. Been reading about all your things, for 30 years, Steve. When I was a boy, I was reading your articles, and that's a point that I want some young people to remember. We never had the internet back then. The only way that we could get information about things was the old-fashioned way. Magazines or you'd go and find a friend that was clever, that knew stuff, and you'd hang out with them for lunch and talk to them. The information that people can get now, it's instantaneous. But back in the day, Steve, this is all we had, and you gave it to us.
Yeah, I have to mirror exactly what Andrew said, Steve. I won't repeat it all, but yeah. Thank you so much for everything you've done over the years. And like Andrew said, there was no internet. There was nothing available to us. We were reading your articles. We were reading things back to find out about our heroes, especially Ed. So thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Again, it's been wonderful to have you on, and to sit and talk to you like this is a little bit starstruck. I am. So thank you.
I don't even know how to respond to that. I am incredibly touched, and I'm humbled by it. And I just hope you love the book as much as I love putting it together. And you guys are great. And I never forget the supporters out there. I never, ever forget. So anything I can ever do for you guys or whatever, I'm always there.
Just come back on the show. That's all we ask.
Done.
Can you stick around, Steve?
Yeah.
Stick around for a minute.
Oh, we stick around?
Yeah.
Yes,
we're going to play the
minute.
exit video. Bye-bye, everybody. We'll see you later on with the Rock Professor.
See ya.